Okay, looks like we're live. So I'm here today. I'm joined by Mert with another of these like casual 30-minute conversations where I'm bringing on different people within the Web3 ecosystem, not necessarily having to do anything with EigenLayer. And today I have Mert. You've probably seen him on Twitter. I've been following you for quite a while, but I've never actually met you. So this is kind of cool for me to kind of be chatting with you for the first time. But do you want to go ahead and do a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure, yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me. And I guess a quick intro would be, yeah. So my name is Mert. I'm the CEO of Helius, which is a developer platform on Solana. And before this, I was at Coinbase, and I also most people probably know me somewhat from just shit posting on Twitter.
Yeah, you're often known as kind of like the face of Solana, even more so than some of the founders. So like when someone is talking about like an advocate for a certain ecosystem, they often like reference you as like the prime example of what they want. I think you and Jesse Pollock are two really good examples of that. So that's kind of how I got to know you a little bit. But yeah, I don't think I knew that you were with Coinbase. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of curious. What is your history in the crypto and blockchain space?
Sure. I guess I first got into it in university, which was like 2017, 2018 kind of timeline. And so I majored in math. I did a double in applied math and communications and satellites engineering. So, which actually came back to really help me on Solana, which is also modeled like a communications channel. And uh, in math, obviously, you take a lot of cryptography courses. That's actually how I found about it first. It was more so from an academic point of view. And at the time, I heard of Ethereum, and my roommate, who's my co-founder now, was mining some coins and stuff. But I was much more interested in like kind of the startup ethos, and I was just very focused on like trying to build startups and work in digital payments and stuff like that. Like fintechs were a big wave back then. So I did that, and then a few years, I worked at roughly Canada's largest banks and a few startups, fintech startups, payment startups, etc. And one day we had to send money to Australia, and I was writing the code I was a tech lead for that part of the project, and I realized that we had to actually send it to once we sent the money, it actually had to jump between multiple jurisdictions before it got to Australia from Canada. And I was like, that's so stupid. Like, why not just use like USDC or something where it's instant and nobody has to do any of this funny business? And the response from my team was something like crypto is a scam. And I wasn't a big fan of that way of thinking. So I joined Coinbase like roughly 1 month after, I would say. Um, and at Coinbase, I was, yeah, I was on a team called Ledger, which is in charge of kind of all the fund movements in Coinbase. So like Coinbase.com, advanced trading, wallet, etc. And so there I got to see a bunch of different blockchains, how they function, how to use them, how to integrate them, and read a bunch of different papers. Um, and yeah, I did that for roughly over a year, and I met a lot of smart people there as well. And I mean, on my own time, I was always building stuff. So like MEV bots, arbitrage bots, DAO tooling, stuff like that on multiple chains actually. But I found that the ones that I built in Solana were just getting the most users, and it was just the most fun, and had like a good developer community because it was like smaller and it was tight knit as opposed to Ethereum. Like it was it's so big that it kind of works against you sometimes for newcomers. And while doing that, I realized that there was a lot of problems building on Solana. Like an analogy I use is like Python is super easy to write, and maybe I'll liken that to something like Solidity, but it's maybe not the most performant language. It works for pretty much most things, but not everything. Where Solana, it's like C, where it's like super performant, but it's very hard to work with. And so I was like, okay, there's opportunity here to build better developer tooling so that people can build applications on this kind of platform that is a totally different approach to how blockchains should function and scale. And so I started Helius, and that was roughly a year and a half ago now. maybe 2 years ago. And on my own time, I would just go on Twitter and then would see people saying maybe not so accurate things, and I would be like, well, based on what I thought I knew, that's incorrect. Here's why. And yeah, just kept doing that.
Nice. So you work at Coinbase. You obviously were not only like, I would say, exposed to the entire industry, but you were working like very closely with it. So therefore, like you did have a good perspective around all this stuff. And I do agree, though, when you're kind of like breaking into a space, that yeah, it's often easier to kind of get your name out there and grow with like a community that or an ecosystem or even a technology. If you kind of get in early, that enough to where you kind of know the technology has potential, but it's not so big that it's hard to kind of make a name for yourself or to build a name for your company, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So, with Helius specifically, you are providing RPC infrastructure for Solana.
Yeah, RPCs, APIs, webhooks, research, data. So one of the things I noticed at Coinbase was obviously Coinbase supports most chains to offer like buys and sells. You need to incorporate those chains onto your infrastructure. And one thing that I found was that when you're a developer platform and you try to support every single chain at once, you kind of end up supporting all of them in a mediocre way. So like you're not particularly good at any single one. And I tried to use what was the flavor of the day back then, like alchemy and whatnot. And I mean, it worked okay, but like it just wasn't really doing the trick for us. Like it wasn't performant enough, or it had some. You can tell that we were very focused on EVM, and maybe Solana was neglected a little bit. And so we actually started Helius as first. I was very annoyed by how unreadable the block explorers are. And so I was like, okay, you know what? We're going to make APIs to make the entire chain human readable first. That was actually the first idea for Helios. And we got some users for that. And as we kept building that ourselves, we were like, wait a minute, our RPCs just don't work because we were using some external ones. And our customers would report the same. And we were like, okay, let's just build it ourselves. And so we did that. And then we just kept doing that and kept listening to kind of developers and what they needed until one day we were like a developer platform with multiple tools.
Nice. That gives me a better perspective because I personally haven't tried building on Solana in a while in terms of like actually aggregating data or pulling data. So it sounds like Helios would be kind of an option if you were wanting to. Would you be able to actually run queries through what some of the APIs that you offer, or would you instead index the data yourself and then run your queries through the infrastructure that the developer built?
Mm-hmm. So it's a mix for like certain common use cases, like tokens and NFTs, for example. There's something called the DAS API, Digital Asset Standard, where we've indexed every single token, every single NFT, compressed or not, on Solana, and you can query it based on like 20, 21 different parameters, and it's a REST API. Or you can just use the RPC and get raw data. So it really depends on what you're looking to do. The one thing is like Solana has, I think, like more data than all chains combined currently. So it's basically impossible to index everything and make it queryable without going bankrupt. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, for SQL, like large bulk queries, you should probably use something like a Dune or a Flipside or Allium.
Got it. Yeah. When I was working at the Graph, one of the services that, or I would say one of the protocols that we were supporting at the time that I was kind of leaving was Solana. I just remember, yeah, how challenging it was to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just obviously completely different infrastructure than we had been building in the past, where we had been building specifically for the EVM, where we support one EVM chain, and it's kind of simple to add another EVM chain. You kind of just copy essentially most of everything, and then you just swap out a few parameters, and then it just works. And then obviously, like this is a completely different beast, not only in terms of scale, but the actual tech itself. So I guess a question going back to what you just mentioned, I haven't looked at a Solana block explorer in a while. Is it still, it's kind of hard to read and understand what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, so we actually, using our APIs, we built like a small explorer for a hackathon, and actually a lot of people liked it. But it turns out that there's a lot of other things that people obviously want. So like I made a decision to target it specifically for non-technical people, but a lot of people in crypto today are, they want to, they're so used to like how Etherscan works and, kind of that entire family of block explorers that's always, copy pasted, like you said, across kind of the different chains that, so we actually sunsetted yesterday, and we're going to rewrite it to be kind of built from the ground up for a specific type of user. In general, though, I think it has gotten better. So there's Solana Explorer, the official one. There's SolScan, which actually got acquired by Etherscan recently. And there's another one called Solana.fm, which I think is an ecosystem favorite. I would say that one is pretty good. Good team, and has like visualizations of how things work. But the one thing about Solana, or maybe the two things, is the account model on Solana makes it kind of harder to understand as opposed to Ethereum, or Solidity, let's say, where it's kind of coupled together, like the code, and it's relatively straightforward what it's doing. On Solana, it's so decoupled that it becomes hard to understand. And then two, probably much more importantly, is that Ethereum kind of has ABIs, and those are published culturally, like pretty frequently and often and updated. On Solana, that's not really the case. There's often many cases where the ABIs for the files are just unavailable, and so you're just looking at raw bytecode instead of like anything even resembling human readability.
Dang. So is it basically impossible at that point to figure out what's going on, or is there ways to actually turn that into something worth or worth using, I guess?
Yeah, so that was actually the first API we built at Helius, which is like programs that don't publish their ABIs, we reverse engineered them to parse what was happening in those programs. Because like you can do a bunch of different tricks, like simulate the contracts yourself, see the output, reverse engineer, go to their like website, and then see the bundled code, unminify it, see how they're encrypting and stuff. There's a bunch of weird stuff you can do. But it's painful, and it's certainly nowhere as mature as how EVM would work, and so that's a big problem still.
So I think two of the things that stand out most to me after being in the industry, and I'm not even here that long. I've only been here a little over 3 years, but just during 3 years, there have been a lot of like crazy ups and downs, and the market's swinging, and crypto going in and out of being like cool and interesting to like the tech community at large. And one of the things that I noticed was like during like 2022 and maybe early 2023, Solana had one of like the worst times of any network that was out there. Everyone was basically saying it was dead. No one like people were literally like moving away from it. And then it had this like massive comeback. And I think it was one of the most interesting things that I'd seen in terms of like, wow, if I was someone building in this community, I would be really, really not only bought in, but I would, I respect that so much, because like you want to be around people who are building regardless of market conditions. But this was like the extreme of that. This was just like insanity. Like people literally were just like trash talking Solana so much. And then it came roaring back as one of, if not, I think it was like, yes, like the top network in a lot of different categories, even now. So tell me, like, what was your experience like being in the Solana ecosystem during that time, and staying, and were you like staying and building during that time, and how was that to kind of experience as someone that was part of it, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it was. So maybe to answer your latter question, yeah, I was here kind of since late 2021, like when most people might remember like the DGen 8 mint, which is really when Solana started taking off the first time. So I was here since then, and actually around the FTX news, we had the idea that the company might be multi-chain, and I was like, actually, we're just going to double down on Solana only, and that was kind of during the downturn, which everybody kind of laughed at the time. But basically, there's always this weird information asymmetry in crypto, which may be it might be caused by some combination of financialization of the technology, plus the primary exchange medium being Twitter. But the people who were like, let's say, talking down on Solana, they had very weak arguments. Now, it doesn't matter if they're weak on Twitter because those get amplified anyways. But like, and this is kind of how people, I mean, I think at the time I had like maybe 10,000 followers, and kind of after this period, it really increased because people would make some argument like, oh, Solana's price is down, therefore like some weird, bizarre conclusion that the tech wouldn't work. And I was like, those things are just not even remotely related. And so I kind of had, actually, thanks to mostly my time at Coinbase, a better understanding of maybe how ecosystems compare in terms of tech, and because I read all the papers and whatnot, and used them. And so there was a lot of information asymmetry that just was due to kind of this echo chambery aspect of CT, where some people will say something and then people will like kind of modify and then say the same thing to get the similar amount of engagement. And then you kind of keep doing that. And then now nobody knows what's reality and not. And so I knew that nothing fundamentally had changed about the network. People would say something like, well, FTX is the only reason it was successful, but they wouldn't realize that like the last 2 or 3 things that FTX did were absolute, like they included backing pure competitors, so like Aptos and whatnot, even Polygon, releasing an NFT marketplace that just absolutely tanked, that nobody even used, and like kind of just not working with Solana teams at all. In fact, they were actually probably actively harming it because of the VC tokenomics, like the high float, low FTV kind of token types. And so I actually saw it as like, wait a minute, this is actually a good thing that these people are gone. Now what we need to do is execute on the tech that is here, fix some of the technical challenges, so like congestion and stability issues, and just kind of do that and kind of build through the noise. And a lot of people on Solana that were here before FTX had a similar sentiment, and we just kept doing that. And ultimately, the only reason we were actually able to come back, of course, is obviously the community, but because the tech actually works, right? Like we were able to onboard or handle some percent of non-trivial traffic so that other people would be like, wait, this is fun, I'm going to invite my friends. And so it would kind of just kept going like that. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there's just so much alpha, and realizing that the people that and the teams that are the most successful have some type of conviction that's based on like a fundamental understanding of something that they believe in, that they grok, that maybe everyone else didn't. Like you mentioned, some type of information asymmetry, where a lot of people are getting their information from places that might not be reliable, or they're too bought into the market like cycles and stuff like that. But very rarely, I think, in crypto or maybe even in tech, does a team or a technology or a person have a like good year or 5-year track record of building where everything just goes right, where the market works well, where everything just like happens and everything is great, right? There's always going to be something. And I think the people that quit often never like actually hit and have a lot of success because they have kind of walked away due to something, right? But like if you've stuck with something over the course of a long period of time, the hype goes up and down, it comes and goes, but you have conviction in something and you're building towards that.
Yeah.
So I guess another topic that I want to touch on, and then I want to kind of talk a little bit about social media marketing and your presence on Twitter and stuff like that. But one question I would like to just touch on, or one topic, is that a lot of people have criticized Solana recently because of the network degradation. But the only reason that it's had this degradation is because it's handling so much throughput. Like if you compare it to pretty much any other network, it's even if you kind of like subtract whatever the transactions that are like not counted as real transactions, if you just purely count the transactions that are the ones that people might categorize as real transactions. It's just handling so much more throughput. Um, so it's almost like it's a victim of its own success. What would you say in terms of like people that don't understand how the network operates, and also maybe some of the things that Solana has learned in order to maybe fix that going forward, and also maybe like some plans that you're aware of for Solana to even scale more going forward. I know you're not like the representative Solana, but you're so tapped into that ecosystem. I think you might be a good person just to touch on this question.
Sure. So maybe first, it's worth understanding briefly what's actually happening. So on EVM or Ethereum, let's say, you send transactions, they go to some mempool. The validators then get the transaction in the mempool, and generally the ones with a higher fee, obviously the validators want to maximize their profit, and so they can pack the blocks appropriately. On Solana, there's no mempool. So this is actually something that people don't quite realize. But basically what happens is the transaction goes from the RPC directly to the block leader. So there's no middle step, which is one of the reasons why the latency is so low, or at least lower comparatively. But when you do that and you get to a certain amount of demand, you get to a point where a lot of RPCs are sending an insane amount of traffic to the block leaders. And the block leaders are like, wait a minute, way too many transactions. How can I possibly prioritize these? Like, I'm talking hundreds of thousands of transactions. And so before, actually, 2 years ago, that would actually bring the validators down. And that's why you would see certain outages. Since then, Solana has added a new networking protocol called Quick. And this protocol allows validators to kind of throttle different connections based on activity, as opposed to just letting it bring them down. But the way that it was implemented in Rust, it's a library called Quinn, has a lot of bugs that the team didn't realize at lower scale. So like they didn't really see it at like a few 100,000 or let's say a few tens of thousands of TPS. But once meme coins start picking up, people get really, really competitive, and they open up bot farms and they just go all in.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out that the library actually is quite broken. Like it basically dies at very, very high loads. And so as a band-aid, what Solana did was, it's okay. Connections with to the block leaders with stake get some sort of priority, which is called Stakeway QoS. Now that has its problems too. And but basically that's kind of what happened there, which is that the lack of a mempool overwhelming the block leaders is kind of the core problem. I would say it kind of depends who you ask on what the fixes are. Like currently, there's been quite a few patches where, like a few weeks ago, you just could not land a transaction. Like your land rates would be like 15% or something. Now it's like 90% ish. So now it's much better, but it's still not perfect and certainly not where it needs to be. And so now there are a few kind of things in progress. One is just keeping to rewrite that library and making it much more efficient. There's also FireDancer, which will like, I think it aims to improve the ingestion rate of the nodes by quite a bit. People can also use something like Jito, which has like technically a mempool, or technically not a mempool right now, but it has like a relay and a different system for laying transactions. Yeah, so like I guess it's, and then obviously there's the economics of it, right? So making the base fees dynamic such that they rise after a certain amount of traffic, making the localized fee markets kick in such that, spamming one piece of state is expensive for whoever's spamming that state, but it doesn't affect other people. So you can take advantage of the multi-threading there. So there's a bunch of conditions or solutions and ways forward like that. I'll be honest, so like the way that it is today is not great. Like I don't like it at all. And I think it's super fair to criticize, should be criticized. But like it's just kind of like one of those things where you don't really see it until you get to a certain amount of scale, and the scale becomes so high that it's like, okay, holy shit, now we need to rebuild the plane while in the air.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, would you kind of compare the weighted transactions to something like with the EVM where you can pay extra gas to get your transaction in?
So currently, that's kind of one of the problems actually, because you can't reliably do that, because, like, remember how I said the transactions being streamed continuously? The validator needs to be able to, like, kind of decide, okay, which ones are the ones with higher fees. And that part, there's a lot of network jitter, which makes them make suboptimal decisions. And staked connections is a way to overcome that, which is to say, like, hey, we already have $1 million in stake. We're going to send you good traffic. And so can you prioritize our traffic? So the fees actually don't currently work properly. That's kind of a big problem. And so once you fix the networking stack such that the randomness is minimized and the validators can make better decisions on which transactions to prioritize to maximize their block rewards, then that starts looking much better and less random and less spammy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess one of the most interesting things, but it's also one of the most common things that I've worked with that was challenging is different forms of civil resistance. And I feel like this is, exactly that. If you have a network that is free, then what stops someone from writing a script that just hits your network a billion times, like per second, right? And then you kind of have these discussions around gasless transactions, and I'm building a network that has the lowest costs, that is the fastest. But in practice, like that's a cool idea, but in practice, these sorts of things come up, right? So I think like Solana figuring whatever Solana does will probably help kind of lay the groundwork for future networks to kind of also copy, because there just hasn't been a network that has had that much demand to run into these issues outside of like the EVM, I guess you could say, because the EVM it kind of solves it, I guess, just by like being prohibitively expensive, But I guess we'll go ahead and move on because we're about to be out on time. But I have like one comment. One is that like I think that people really like you because you are extremely like pro Solana, but you're also very pragmatic about its shortcomings. So you're not the type of person that's going to sit there and like shill Solana without acknowledging its downsides. And therefore, you've built like a very good name in the community as someone who's a good representative of an ecosystem. And what I've heard now is like people are basically using your name in terms of like we want to find the Mert of like our ecosystem. We need to find someone who's going to be like that advocate, who's knowledgeable, outspoken, pragmatic. And we've even had like similar conversations in EigenLayer where I'm like, we need to find the Mert of EigenLayer, and therefore we're like identifying different people that we think are doing pretty good work in terms of education and advocacy on social media. But how do you feel that social media ties into having a successful business in crypto? I feel like if someone wanted to launch a competitor to yours today and they had the exact same product offering, they couldn't compete because no one like knows them and trusts them, even if their technology was great. But they know you. They probably have a lot of trust in you if they've been keeping up. So yeah, I'm just curious, like if you were to give someone some type of advice on social media strategy, like what would that look like for someone that is a founder or even hiring someone for their company to help out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. I've always one mental model that might help is like people care not just about product, but they also care about story. And so like Seth Godin, who's like a marketer, has a good framework for this, which is like, I don't care if there's like a multinational giant corporation that's selling like lemonades out of a box or something. But if there's like a kid in like this neighborhood that I know, and I know like the parents or something, they're good people, and the kid's selling like a lemonade, I'm gonna buy it even if I don't like the story matters to me there. And so like marketing is about or social media and whatnot. That's ultimately just a tool for conveying your values, right? My values are basically I really like kind of speaking my mind and saying what I think is right, learning from the mistakes, and kind of putting myself out there. Those are kind of what I like doing. And then if other people like me doing that, then they're more likely to perhaps think that those values carry over to like Helius, right? Which I try to do, by the way. Like, so I do handle like most of the customer service tickets and stuff like myself on some capacity when I can. And so I guess in terms of strategy, what I would say is like, one of the things I really dislike is when founders at an early stage outsource their storytelling and marketing and go to market to agencies who don't, who like nobody can tell the story of the company as well as a founder, right? Like as a founder, you're telling the story to everybody, right? You're trying to hire people, you're trying to raise money, you're trying to get users, you're trying to sell the businesses, you're trying to motivate your team. So the founders need to be able to tell the story very effectively. And I think social media is just a platform for doing that authentically, right? As long as you're not like saying weird corporate stuff and making those generic partnership announcements, which I really don't like, and saying things that people can predict that you will say, like that they can kind of draw a box around you and say, okay, this person's going to say this because it's just normal speech. If you do that, they're just going to write you off, because guess what? On social media, there's thousands of people like that, and you won't, their brain will automatically label you as somebody who's not worth paying attention to, because if they want to pay attention to that, there's a bunch of alternatives that are similar. So you need to kind of convey your uniqueness and be authentic, which I don't think is. It turns out it's much harder for some people than I would have guessed. But really, it's just about that. I would say, like, I just don't like fundamentally. I can't really trust a company unless I understand them, their values, how they do business, and stuff like that, especially in crypto, right? Like crypto is all about obviously there's technology, but there's and the finances, but it's also fundamentally about a new way of building things as well, with clear kind of trust boundaries, trust assumptions, and decentralization, and kind of all that ethos. And for example, another person who has really good stuff on this is Balaji, who will say something like, founder-led, go direct, right? Coinbase does this, actually. I kind of learned it from Brian at Coinbase, which is like, do not use these Wall Street journals and whatever to talk to your audience. Talk to them directly. They already follow you. This is social media superpowers. You can connect directly. So just do it. That's kind of
yeah. I do like the fact that Brian still like tweets and makes company announcements and like all types of stuff from his personal Twitter account. It's kind of wild considering what he could be spending his time doing, but in reality that's probably extremely important. I think the thing that I've talked to a lot of people about that also I also sometimes have happened to me is that it's kind of like it feels very uncomfortable sometimes to put yourself out there and talk about things that are happening from your perspective, because you're afraid of criticism, or you're afraid of judgment, or you're afraid of saying the wrong thing. But yeah, for me, I'm always struggling with that, to be honest.
Yeah, I have. I think everybody struggles with that, and so there's two ways I actually get around that. It's very common. Kind of, they're probably a bit more aggressive, so take it with a grain of salt. But really, it's just two things. So, like, number one, I tell myself, like, it's not about me, right? Nobody fundamentally, nobody actually cares that much about what you are saying or who you are. Like, nobody. Whatever, like CT is actually really good at this, because they forget everything that happens like the week after. Like,
Yeah.
somebody will scam you, they're like, oh, I forget all about it.
They'll
right?
like invite them on a podcast like the next week.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, just remember that, like, you are thinking about yourself much more than anybody else is thinking about you. They don't really care about you that much. Okay, they have their own things. They have their own lives to live, all their own problems. Okay, so that's like number one. Like, kind of getting over yourself, and how important you think you are in the world is a good one. I learned that one from, I think, like a book by Kobe Bryant or something a while ago. It's actually been super helpful. And then number two, this one's the much more extreme one. Kind of just remember that you're gonna die one day. It's kind of how I think about it. Like, it's like, if you don't do it now, okay, don't do it, whatever. But then when are you gonna do it, right? Like, and like, fundamentally, you do need to be okay with being confronted and taking criticism, right? Like, if you can't defend your ideas, that might actually be a good idea, that you should tweak your ideas and improve the ideas, right? That's also how I use Twitter mostly, is testing my ideas and kind of just, it's like shipping a product. You ship a product, you put it in the hands of users, you get feedback, you improve the
I
product.
love that.
Right? Same with ideas. You put your ideas out there. Maybe it's awful, and everybody's like, no, that's like really stupid. Don't ever have that idea again. And then it's like, maybe they're right, and maybe you take some of their feedback and improve the idea. Maybe you come up with a different idea, and you kind of just iterate.
I think this last 10 minutes of conversation is like super critical, helpful information to anyone that's trying to up their social media game or just become more comfortable like posting there. So this has been really great. We went a little bit over on time. I'm really, really appreciative of your time. I know you're really busy, and you're someone I wanted to chat with for a long time. So thanks for coming on. And where can people connect with you and learn more about what you're doing? And do you want to say anything to wrap it up?
Sure, yeah. People can just find me on Twitter. 0x Mert _ is just my @ and then if you are interested in building on Solana, you can just go to our site, helius.dev. And yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Awesome. All right. Thanks everyone for checking it out. We'll have more of these starting next week. Later.